Hey guys, this is a pretty dark episode. We're touching on a lot of wartime and survivorship and basically things that may be triggering to some people. So just be advised that this content may not be suitable for all listeners.
Lore Together is proud to be part of the Boss Rush Games Network. Feel free to find out more at bossrushgames.com/network. Hi, I'm Safi.
And I'm Mystic.
And this is Lore Together. This is the podcast where a husband and wife team go over all of the storytelling, world building, and character analysis of your favorite video games, because that's what we like to do together. We lore together.
Yep. And this is episode 34. But before we get into the episode, we have our little buddy. You may hear him in the background.
Yes, he's a very opinionated little buddy. He is not necessarily wee,
But he is talkative now.
But he's talkative. Yeah. So he may share an opinion or two.
Before we get into the episode, though, if you'd like to contact us, you can do that on Twitter at LoreTogether, on Instagram at LoreTogether, through email at loretogether@gmail.com. And if you'd like to support this podcast, you can do so by going to patreon.com/LoreTogether, where you can pay a per-episode pledge to get early access to episodes, mini-episodes, Q&As, and other things we may be doing in the future. So I mentioned last time that I was going to do something a little different this time.
You did.
And
you mentioned it on our live stream, to be specific.
No, I think I mentioned in the episode that I was going to do something a little different.
Okay, that too, yeah.
And the problem is, so there is lore to the games we're covering today.
Okay.
But it's not the focus. Like most games we do, that there's a full storyline.
Yeah.
Here, it's more character focus.
Okay.
And so we're going to be talking about two games, actually. And another thing that I wanted to touch on, because we've mentioned it numerous times.
Yeah.
We keep doing games that we're like, oh, this is surprisingly political.
Right.
Or surprisingly has a message. Just Cause.
Yes.
Halo, obviously, has a message. Skies of Arcadia, we said, had a message.
Yes.
Even Myst, when we talk about Myst, we're getting into themes of...
colonialism specifically was the one that I was finding a lot when you were describing the story, especially in Riven. And
so I don't want to make this a political podcast.
Not specifically political.
Or a political episode, really. These games are character-centric games without the depth of, say, Mass Effect.
Okay. So you don't have to take a hardline stance because you don't have a character who specifically has an archetype about their hardline stance.
Right. There's things you can make your own stance, but these games are very much about perspective.
Right.
And the two we're covering are Papers, Please.
Ooh.
And This War of Mine. So we're going to start with Papers, Please.
Okay.
Do you know anything about either of those games?
So I feel like I've heard...
Papers, Please, you can kind of guess a little bit.
I feel like I've heard of This War of Mine. I will start with the one I know less of. This War of Mine, I feel like, was it made specifically with veterans in mind? I'm trying to remember if I've heard about this from a friend of ours who talked about, like...
I could see people...
armed forces stuff, yeah.
Getting a veteran perspective out of it from some of the characters.
Okay.
But not necessarily does it relate to veterans.
Okay. So I might have confused that with a different game. So
if we want to talk about war games, one of the reasons I wanted to cover this, actually, not to jump on your topic, we'll get back to what you know about the games in a second.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons I wanted to cover this was there are so many games that are in the industry, and that we'll cover too.
Yeah.
That seem to glorify the war and the war hero.
Right.
And not a lot that goes into the average person and that perspective.
Right.
And that's kind of what these two games do in a weird way.
Okay.
But so This War of Mine, I don't think you have
any real grasp of it.
Okay. What about Papers, Please?
I have heard of it before. As some of you know, I'm an H-Bomber Guy fan, and he talked about ludonarrative in one of his videos. I think it's in the video about ludonarrative, and he talks about the thing he liked about Papers, Please was the point it was trying to get about the mundanity of the process within the area, because it's basically a border patrol game, but not a you're like hunting for
right.
coyotes on the border, trying to make sure people don't get smuggled in or out. This is you're literally somebody saying,
You're a paper
papers,
pusher.
please. Yeah. It's so, and I don't want to spoil any of it, but I do know a little bit about some of the things that can happen in that game, but just like one or two things.
So I'm not going to do every single detail. There's a lot of different things we could get into, individual characters or individual scenes. I'm going to mention
Right.
a few that kind of I feel fit a theme and discuss them, and we'll go through them. But obviously, we're going to do a broad strokes of these games and the gameplay and stuff. I'm going to get into gameplay on this one because it actually does kind of matter a little bit.
Oh, it sounds like we're getting a little literary, which is why Celeste thought that I was an English major in a recent 1v1 episode. So listen to Boss Rush Games 1v1 podcast when you get a chance.
So we're going to start with Papers, Please.
Cool.
The game takes place after the 6-year war has ended between, and I'm going to be really bad with some of these names. So I'm going to say one thing right here. Both of these games seem to take place in Eastern European, quote, countries. They're not real places.
It sounds like it's just a place where the developers know so little of that it's easy for them to just put
Not always.
a paint
for
over
instance, This War of Mine, the developer's in Warsaw.
Oh,
So
they're close enough, yeah.
I think it just is it's especially in Papers, Please. You're talking about a communist country.
That was the sense I got, yeah.
But the war happened between the countries of Arstotzka and Kolechia.
Kolechia?
Yeah.
Kambuchi? What?
And there's other countries you have that are throughout the area, but those are the two main ones that we kind of focus on because they're the ones that the war happened between.
And again, these are fictional nations.
They're all fictional, yeah.
Yeah.
And after the war ended, there is this treaty that ends up splitting this city into east and west.
So it's like Berlin.
Except it doesn't have not an enclave.
Okay.
So the east one is in Arstotzka, the west one is in Kolechia, and it's not surrounded by, the opposing side
Right.
like Berlin was, which is a big deal. Like that changes the power and the ability of information to move back and forth a lot.
Right.
That said, this is after a peace treaty, so there is information moving back and forth, and there's going to be immigration allowed over the border again. So the player character is a unnamed male border inspector.
Okay. Is he from one of the two sides?
He is from Arstotzka.
Arstotzka. Okay.
Arstotzka.
Arstotzka.
I think that Arstotzka. It's the Z that's throwing me.
Arstotzka.
That's
what okay. So I'll just say, when you grow up in Chicago, you see a lot of Polish language around. So I would assume, with my limited knowledge on Polish, Arstotzka. But again, that's not the only language that puts a Z next to other consonants and expects
it's
you to know
just
what's
throwing
going
me.
on.
It's a fictional place, so I'm not insulting anybody.
Yeah, thankfully.
If you do want to watch, so one thing about Papers, Please that I find fascinating is there is a official adaptation into a web episode on YouTube.
Oh, wow, cool.
That's pretty well done.
Oh, well, I might watch that then. Well, not until after our stream, because I don't know which one we're playing. So
the player character is you're basically going to be inspecting passports. You got this job through a job lottery.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And like Arstotzka is very authoritarian and is a communist country. Mm-hmm. And this is kind of like the way everyone always pictured Russia.
Yeah.
When we were talking during the 80s and stuff. This game takes place in 82.
Okay. So again, and this is, of course, speaking to our American stereotypes, right?
Right. So you win this job through a job lottery. And Arstotzka is very much you have a happy family. Mm-hmm. We want you to have a successful family, quote unquote. You are the breadwinner, and you do have to care for your family. You're the only person bringing in income. And you have to pay heat, you have to pay rent, you have to pay for medical, you have to pay...
Okay.
Yeah.
And this is, I guess, so we're sticking with the patriarchal idea of a breadwinner too, correct?
In this particular case, I don't know if that's actually trying to make a statement.
I don't think it necessarily is, but I'm just trying to picture the setting. I'm not trying to make a
That's
judgment
fair.
on that.
Again, also 80s,
Also 80s, which
Yeah.
would, yeah, that's another reason why I would lean
which
that way.
is a long time ago.
Yeah, we were born in the 80s, so there are, oh man.
So, as you're checking these passports, you have one person at a time. You check their passport, and you have multiple rules that the state has given you
Right.
based off of what's been going on in current events, political events, violence on the border, all that stuff. You get different criteria that you have to meet or look out for,
Right.
and you get paid per person that you stamp
That you stamp to go through?
or decline. Like each person that you process.
Okay.
You get docked for each mistake you make per day over 2 mistakes.
Wow.
And so you have to keep money coming in
Right.
because you have a family to worry about, and their health will change and all this other stuff.
Oh my
so
God.
it is to your benefit to process people quickly to
Right.
get as many as you can, but then they keep adding more stuff. You will start with just passports and identity cards. Fine.
Mm-hmm.
Then you'll add Ministry of Labor tickets, and then you'll add other like entrance tickets
man.
and stuff. And you have to look for forgeries too for all of these, and they all come from these different countries as well. You have like Orbistan and Impor and all like a bunch of different countries.
It's not just Arstoka and
Kolechia.
Kolechia. Okay.
No. Yeah, they come from all over the region in all these different countries. The United Federation is a country. There's Impor, there's Orbistan, there's a couple I'm probably forgetting off the top of my head.
Ugh.
And they all have different symbols. They all have different cities that the passports are issued from. It's a lot of stuff to look at.
Right.
And then you have the fact that this is not a secure piece. This is a fragile piece.
Oh wow. Okay.
You're also at a border crossing. You have people trying to smuggle things through.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and you start getting stuff that you can use to help, quote unquote, you, like x-ray machines, weight panels, so you can see how heavy people are compared to what their official documentation is.
Oh no. Oh no. Oh
You
dear.
get a sniper rifle at one point.
Whoa. What?
And here's the fun thing. So there are certain people that you will always meet on certain days. Mm-hmm. There are also procedurally generated people who will show up.
Right.
And so these certain people you'll meet every single time, they're part of the overarching story of what's happening. And a lot of that ties into what's called the Order of the Ezek Star,
Okay.
which is basically an organization that is trying to overthrow the Aristocan government.
Whoa. Okay. So.
And they're going to use you. They'll bribe you. They'll give you money, which you need,
Yeah.
to let certain people through or poison somebody. You can poison someone's passport for them.
Oh my. Oh God, that's crazy.
And it gets really ridiculous because the first couple days are easy.
Yeah.
Nothing too crazy. Then stories start getting personal.
Right.
Then people have pleas and they have family they haven't seen, or their documentation has been intentionally messed
Oh,
with.
this is getting really painful.
And it starts getting really hard to say no to certain people. But then you let certain people through and then a bomb goes off.
Right.
You know? So you start having to weigh, is this an honest mistake or is this intentionally?
Yeah.
And there's 20 different endings to this game.
Whoa. This is like Stanley Parable, but with sad, sad politics.
And this game only lasts 31 days
Of playtime, you mean?
of playtime.
Interesting.
There is one ending where Aristotska is still the same power structure, and you're alive and able to do your job. And that's called the endless mode then. Because you can just keep running the border checkpoint. Every other one,
my gosh.
you've either fled the country, you're dead, or the Ezek Star has
taken over.
or you're in prison. One of those four things happens. So it gets really ridiculous, and it all basically relies on choices that you make or people that you let through.
Wow.
And even there's some personal stuff that you never actually think about. So at one point, a woman comes through and gives you a letter. Mm-hmm. She's fine. At least I think she was fine. I can't remember. But she basically her letter basically says that she's worried about somebody else in line. Basically, turns out the guy is running a human trafficking ring through what a quote through a strip club.
Oh, wow.
And if you clue into it, you don't find out. You can just detain him because you have suspicion. You'll get this. I think you'll get the citation for it. But then the newspaper, every day you get a newspaper, the newspaper will say, human trafficking ring shut down. If you don't arrest him,
oh no,
you'll see a news or paper article about dancers are being found dead.
Oh no. Oh gosh.
So, and most, like, I looked at the wiki and there are people like, wait, what? That was
That was related to this guy? Yeah.
And yeah, so you have to pay attention to everything. Mm-hmm. And it is.
But yet you're doing one of the most mundane jobs possible.
And it's mundane. It's a lot of red tape. And then you start trying to be a human in it, quote unquote. And it gets harder and harder. There is a guard named Sherju.
Yeah.
And he has a lady friend from Kolechia named Elisa. Her paperwork she doesn't have all her paperwork.
Oh, no.
Do you let her through knowing that her family is dead? The only person she has left is this guard in Aristotska. Or do you deny her entry, you know?
Right. And then she probably will end up, God, I don't want to say what she ends up doing. The whole thing with suspecting somebody who's behind you in line reminds me of this horrible time. So I'd fly to and from college a lot. I went to college out on the East Coast, and then of course I came back to the Midwest at home to visit family. And there was one time I was waiting in an airport to board a plane, and everything was fine. It was like just regular old people, and then suddenly the TSA pulled these two gentlemen aside who were of what I would assume to be South Asian descent. And some other passenger of this ride of mine went to another passenger and goes, I'm glad they did something. They were making me uncomfortable. And I was just like, excuse me?
Yeah.
And it just, the hackles went off the back of my neck. I was like, they just want to fly a plane. Like, really?
It gets... Yeah, people's fear gets the better of them quite often.
Yeah.
And I think these games kind of play into that in a weird way.
Yeah. So when you said that, there's somebody who's basically just saying, I got a funky feeling about somebody in line, I thought it was going to be more something like that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there are cases in the game where nothing would happen per se if you let this person through.
Right.
But you'll never really know. And you're playing against stereotypes.
Right.
And
of course, there is a little bit of comedy in the game, too. You can't just have it all be whatever. There is a repeated guy named, I think it's Georgi Kostava. Mm-hmm. And he just is always a bum. He's always got stuff wrong. His passport is either made with literal crayon at one point.
Oh, my Lord, really?
Or... Yeah, so there's some humor in here, but then you counter it with the Ministry of Immigration official who will reprimand you and eventually fire you and jail you for having personal artifacts like a picture your kid drew hanging in the office. But then he also wants you to let a lady friend through the thing without her paperwork done.
All right, so then that's just a power trip.
Yeah, so... Obviously, there's a lot of balance here and a lot of stuff to take in. And now we're going to move on to the other game, which I feel is actually sadder.
No! That's already sad enough, is that you're stuck in a bureaucratic job and you can barely win one way or another.
Well, okay, let's not go jump to this war of mine yet. One of the interpretations I saw of Papers, Please is that it is a commentary on the thankless job
Okay.
and how difficult it actually can be. Like, people think, oh, that's easy, and how much work actually goes into it. Like, immigration and customs enforcement, is not just ICE and the U.S. Border Patrol
Right.
that we see in videos and everything on the news. It's also people who work at, the airport when you
Yes.
land from whatever, and they will check your passport, and that's where you get the question of how are you here,
Right.
why are you here, how
Yeah.
long are you staying.
Customs, all of that.
That's
yeah.
your job in this game. Mm-hmm. And most people probably, like, it's not as arduous probably as this game makes it out to be, but that's a very important job with a lot of stuff that happens and that most people probably don't think about.
Right.
But now put it during a fragile peace in a war zone.
This also reminds me of, for a while I had an interest in the crazy difference between North and South Korea. And if you go towards the DMZ, they have these places where you're supposed to be able to have talks with the other side. And when the South Korean armymen check it, they're so scared that they will hold each other's hand in a chain to check lights and stuff for fear that military men from North Korea will kidnap them and take them to the other side.
The funny thing is, on the other side, on North Korea, from what I remember, is that there will always be one person looking towards South Korea at the checkpoint,
Yeah.
and then two people staring away towards him to make sure that he doesn't run.
Right. it's a, and there's just such a weird difference in the culture just because of what paths they went.
Yeah.
And how that manifests in who they decide is at the border, how they conduct themselves at the border, what...
Well, getting into North and South Korea would be an episode of itself if we were doing a politics podcast.
Or history podcast. And it sounds like Paper Please isn't getting to something that is that extreme because there is still actually migration.
There's still migration. They do close the border. You will get tickers. You'll get tickers and stuff basically saying close the border for all of these people. We've reached that quota for the day, which gets into a whole nother mess of history of national quotas and everything.
Oh.
But that's kind of like what happens after a war or during an unsettled peace.
Right.
This war of mine is during a war.
Okay.
And the difference here between what you probably thought it was is in this war of mine, you're a civilian living in the war zone.
Oh, no. That's a nightmare. That is a nightmare.
We are going to Pogorin, Groznovia. Pogorin is a city. Groznovia is the
country.
Either country or the state. A lot of stuff is a little fuzzy on this one.
Okay. But again, we're talking about fictional areas that are assumed to be somewhat Eastern Europe.
This one is in the midst of civil war.
Okay.
There's never a real reason given for the war, but appears to be territorial based on a couple threads of information here and there.
Okay.
And deals with the governmental army.
Okay.
As you have in a civil war. And a group of rebels who call themselves the Viceni Liberation Uprising.
Okay.
The interesting thing about this game compared to Papers, Please is there's 12 possible characters.
Whoa.
Which is a bit misleading, actually. You don't play as a single character.
Okay.
You are basically running a sim. It's like The Sims in a way. I've heard a lot of people liken this game to The Sims.
Whoa. That's interesting.
In that you control one person at a time, but you're managing a group.
Are you managing a group of rebels or just a group of survivors?
A group of survivors.
Okay.
You can't leave during the day because snipers will kill you. So your whole day is spent upgrading and looking through your house and building stuff and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And then at night you have to simultaneously guard your place from raiders.
Okay.
And send people out to scavenge for supplies or go possibly find places to trade.
Oh, it's really scary.
And it's a very interesting visual game as well. It's 2.5D.
Yeah.
So the camera's locked, but it's all 3D assets.
Okay.
but everything has this sketch filter on it. So it's kind of also dark and kind of amorphous at the same time in a weird way.
Okay. Dark and amorphous like a Civil War.
Yeah. So you have 3 randomly selected characters from these 12 that you start with.
Okay.
And here's where I think this game kind of gets interesting in that these characters have met before you started. This is day 1, but they all have some loose history that is kind of randomly generated.
Okay.
Where this is day 1 of them being together, but she used to be a reporter and he had his own cooking TV show.
Right, so they were in the same...
And the guy that they're living with is a football player that she once interviewed.
Okay.
You know, so they have this weird connection. And then as you play and interact with other survivors or make big choices, the characters all change a little bit, you know. And we'll get into some examples as we go, but let's get through a little bit more of the history here.
Okay.
One of the survivors, to flesh out what happened here, named Arica, fled Gravia when it was bombed to heck.
Okay.
Amongst a terrified crowd, her father literally carrying her to Pogoran on foot in a single night.
Whoa. Whoa.
During the initial fighting, a militia member named Roman witnessed his fellow militia members murder any civilian that, quote, looked at them funny as a precaution. Civil war. Guerrilla fighting.
That's really sad.
But very much in tune with how wars kind of happen these days when you don't have army versus army. Mm-hmm. You know? And he's a militia member. You know?
Yeah.
And then after the city is surrounded by the government. So now the government is surrounding Pogoran, and there's rebels and civilians inside, as well as, you know, governmental groups. Roman witnesses rebel forces interrogate entire groups of people to identify government sympathizers.
Okay.
He knows that they're not all sympathizers, but
Right.
many of them still die.
Yeah.
And a survivor named Amelia had her entire family murdered at the hands of militia members. She was in the rich neighborhood. Her family was well off. Her family got killed for resources.
Right, essentially. Resources, and for sometimes in those cases, the audacity to ever have been living comfortably in the first place.
Right.
There's a lot of this vengeance idea that comes up with that.
So that's kind of where we find ourselves in this, like, anyone can be a danger, but you still have to survive. You know, you still have to find a way to scrape by. Mm-hmm. And this is where it gets really interesting to me is you would think in most games, you know, I remember one of the reviews I watched. I have played this game. I was actually playing this about an hour ago.
Okay.
This is what I was playing. But one of the reviews I watched as research had mentioned they put Roman on a mission after they had gotten attacked and raided.
Yeah.
They put Roman on a mission with a gun to go attack another settlement and steal,
Wow.
thinking he's the soldier, he'll be fine. And it devastates him,
Wow.
and he gets depressed and doesn't do work around the house. He won't get out of bed.
Oh my gosh.
And then everyone else's mood starts sliding too.
Because the soldier is now no longer...
Well, because any of them.
Yeah.
When I was playing, my characters were content. That was a status that you could get, was content, because I had one of my guys go to help when a tenement was shelled, extract people from the rubble and help them.
Wow.
So that made all the people in my thing content because they had helped other people.
Right.
And there's all sorts of stuff you have to balance, whether they're hungry, tired, very tired, you know, and you have to scrounge for stuff, and then you can go trade if you find friendly people. And the bartering system is very different than what most people would expect. There's no currency. There's no bottle caps like in Fallout.
Right.
You know? So you are literally trading item for item, and they have different worths to different people.
Right, exactly. Because it's about, you know, what is scarce to you versus what is scarce
Well, there's
to
a guy
me.
whose father, like, here's the thing. There's a guy whose father is sick and needs meds. He
Yeah.
will trade you more for any medical equipment that you have. Mm-hmm. You can also just shoot him and then go steal the stuff. So it's like,
Whoa.
yeah. So
Okay.
how dark do you want to get just to survive? You know? And of course, that does then eat away at your character potentially. Not all the characters have a moral problem with this.
Right.
All the characters you can possibly play as have different moralities and different views on things.
Right.
And that feeds into the rest of the group then.
Oh, okay. So you're setting the baseline of the mood in the entire encampment you're in?
Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
So the interesting thing there, though, is every character has a bio, and they all start with, here's what I was doing, here's my dreams, blah blah blah. Day 4, I'm so glad we helped those people.
Right.
We should do more, blah blah blah. Day 7, I can't believe, it starts filling in their personal thoughts as you go and how they're feeling about things.
Wow.
So that's why it's kind of hard to do lore on this one. There's not a lot of stuff about the war. There's a lot of stuff about the characters, but it all depends on what you do.
Okay. Okay. Interesting.
And I found that to be very interesting. And it's a very lauded game. You can find accolades all over the place for this thing because it is a perspective you do not see very often in war games.
No, it's because a lot of people are looking for that fantasy play. They want to be the hero. They want to be the bigwig. But I think there's something about the necessity to build empathy by building experiences for us to play. Kind of like Hellblade, Cinema Sacrifices. It's still kind of a hero thing, but our hero is clearly mentally ill.
Yeah.
So we're rooting for somebody who has a mental illness and letting her get through her pain in the way that makes the most sense to her. And it's a unique perspective. And the same thing can be said for like what you're saying with both of these games, that we're still talking about war and we're still talking about necessarily quote unquote heroism, but how do you become a hero in a bureaucratic system where you couldn't even choose what job you were given? I should
Right.
say. Or how can you be a hero when you're desperate for supplies and the easiest way to get it is to murder?
Right.
Like how do you balance that? And
You
there's
wanna-
got to be a space for these hard conversations.
You want to know what's really dark, though?
Uh-oh.
This War of Mine
Yeah?
released expansions.
Uh-huh.
One of them is called The Little Ones.
No, we're talking about child soldiers?
We're talking about children stuck in the middle of a war zone.
Oh. Oh. Oh God.
This came out in 2014. So we're talking, for years now we've been seeing Syria and we've been seeing war orphans and all this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this idea of taking current events and making games off of them is controversial to some people.
I would agree.
And I think it depends on how you handle it. Like, if you remember the game 6 Days in Fallujah
Oof.
was very controversial.
Oof.
And I don't think it actually ended up coming out, if I remember correctly.
Yeah,
That was a different... That was, war from the soldier's point of view, but real. Like, it wasn't...
I think it's hard because you need to be able to have some distance with your art to be able to sometimes convey it, you know, fairly. I'm not even saying truthfully, but fairly. It was kind of like how I took a writing course, a script writing course actually in college, and the professor, he very specifically said, I've had people who want to write about like recent breakups or things like that, and you cannot write about something like that when it's so raw. You have to have some distance from it. So if you want to write about something that has happened to you, you need to make sure it's something that has happened a long time ago. And I ended up writing about something that, even though it was about a college student, was related to something that happened to me and my family when I was about 13.
Right.
So he was right. It was a lot more cathartic, and it was a lot easier to write about it once I had that emotional distance. It's not to say that it still didn't hurt, but it was easier for me to evaluate why I felt, why other people would feel the way they felt, why they would act the way that they did, rather than when you're in the middle of it. Like right now, I mean, I wouldn't want to play a video game that talked about the 2016 election. Let's not talk about sides of that. That was a really rocky time. It's been a really rocky time as an
Right.
identity crisis as an
Well,
American. And
the
I don't want
world
to
has-
play a game about that. I just
Right.
don't. I'd be willing to
Which we could have done.
Yeah.
We could have done almost every election. You will see a game version of that election in the U.S.
Right.
Going all the way back to Bush and Reagan.
And I don't want to play those.
Right.
I just, it's too raw. The stakes feel too high. For some of us, the stakes are that high. I can't do it. I shouldn't say, it's technically for all of us, the stakes are high. But I think for some of us, it's easier to ignore when stakes are high. I don't know. Maybe I'm not saying it right. But I think it's easier to have distance from that. Now, unfortunately, what's happened in Syria it's not the first time in recent history that a civil war like that
True.
has happened.
Nor is it the most recent one.
No. And I mean, there are parts of the Syrian war that are very, very unique to the situation at hand. And my heart breaks for what's happened to any country that has been essentially defrauded by egotistical leaders.
Right.
And that's what it feels like happening over there. I am not a scholar. I'm not going to comment on it. But that's from when I read and watch what other people who know more about it tell me about. That's what it feels like to me.
Right.
And it'd be very hard for me to think it's okay to play a game like this War of Mine if that felt like something that had recently happened much closer to us.
Right.
So I can see the insensitivity of it. It's kind of like how, it's funny you mentioned this. So one of the podcasts that we listen to, Small Town Murder, they specifically go out of their way to say, look, we're not going to make fun of the victims or the victims' families. We're going to make fun of the murderers. We're going to make fun of the bumbling cops. We're going to do that, and they have the reason why, and it involves cursing, so I won't say on this family-friendly podcast. But, somebody tried to call them out and say, well, on their Instagram recently, well, they're just going to defend it because they've never lost a loved one to murder. And literally, they responded back, we actually have lost somebody to murder. One of them, James Petrocello, famously talks about the story of his great-grandmother being murdered in her home.
Jeez.
Like, savagely.
So we're putting a warning at the beginning of this episode, I imagine.
Yeah, we should. Savagely to the point where, like, when she was buried, they put a ton of pearl necklaces around her neck to hide her injuries.
Ooh.
And that is when James Petrocello made his first morbid joke to his cousin. So for him, that's his coping mechanism. And
Yeah.
I think when it comes to these video games, I think
Well,
that's where the difference is. Is it a coping mechanism? Is it your way you learn? And does that mean that it has to be acceptable to everybody?
Well, I think it is a coping mechanism for some people to begin with.
Right.
But as far as whether people learn from it, there's a couple things I find interesting about the reviews, especially for both these games were very highly rated and did very well.
They sound extremely thoughtful with even just the overview that you gave us right now, Mystic. It sounds like they've put a lot of effort and thought into the construction of these games.
But I think some people don't appreciate it in the same way. Mm-hmm. There are people who approach it just as a game.
Right.
This is a game. And, they will not look at it as a commentary or a piece of art as we
Right.
like to look at games.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, there's two things about this War of Mine that I just saw. First off, it's been made into a cooperative board game that we should get.
Oh, there it goes. Like that and Terraforming Mars. There goes all our money. Yeah.
But also, I just saw this line. In 2020, the Polish Chancellery of the Prime Minister announced that this War of Mine will be added to the recommended reading list in Polish high schools
Whoa.
during the academic year 2020 to 2021. This is the first initiative in the world to add a video game to recommended reading in school.
That like literally gave me chills right now. That's like, I'm actually kind of emotional about that. That's really kind of touching, especially because just knowing what Poland has gone through historically,
Well, they've been through that.
What?
They've been through.
They've been specifically through that, specifically a number of times. And I find it very touching that they find merit in a game that's going to explore the human element of that suffering. It's not just like dates and battles and, technology and those other kinds of facts, but it's also the qualitative experience of that.
And to put a cap on what this War of Mine was inspired by, in saying that Syria was not the only or the most recent, it was inspired by the atrocities that Bosnian civilians endured during the 92-96 siege of Sarajevo.
Oh, God, yeah. We were kids when that happened, and I just had no idea what was going on there. It was just a sad place that the president and the first lady visited. That was my understanding of it.
Also,
and
it's one of those things of, until it's actually in your neck of the woods,
yeah,
it's distant. Even the world being so small it is. That being said, with the internet, I think that's less of a thing.
Well, and it's interesting that you say, Mystic, your neck of the woods, because to be honest, it's not that far for some people. This trauma that a lot of people in certain war zones is similar to some of the trauma in low-income areas in America. And unfortunately, this is when it's going to sound like we're being a little political, but there's a racial element to that because America is a country that was founded on a slave system that was based on race. I shouldn't say specifically founded, but essentially built up on and has a foundation based on a racist slave hierarchy. And because of that, there's generational suffering. And when you say, if it's not close to you, and the sad thing is, it is. When you are raised African American, you learn about the battles that you have to remember that your white peers get to forget. And one of the many things we have to remember is lynching, because it keeps coming back.
Well, it's not just
and back.
So, not to explain history that you already know,
right?
But have you seen the Watchmen TV series?
I've not. I've spoiled part of it for me. I do want to watch it, but it's on HBO Max, and I don't have that.
It opens with a scene in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Yeah.
During the Red Summer.
Yes. Yes.
And there are people you will find anytime you see that posted, like, I thought this was made up for the show.
And guys, it's not.
And
fair warning, do not Google that when you're having a great day. That is something to be read knowing you're reading something really serious. Like the same severity if you decide you're going to finish Anne Frank's diary.
Right. But that's the interesting thing is, to tie this all up into one big bow, is using the medium of comic books, essentially, because Watchmen is a comic book TV show. So I'm going to couch it as comic books.
Comic books and TV. I would say both.
To give perspective on something that people didn't even know about. Because a lot of people never heard about that in school.
Right. And it's continuing kind of what Alan Moore's intention of the series was,
But, I don't know what it's like to live through a siege.
Right.
As a civilian.
Right.
This War of Mine is not going to give me that fine, granular detail. But it can still make me empathize so much.
Yeah, and I think that if there's, from all my, the connective tissue I'm bringing to this episode of what you've brought to it is anything, I think the thing that's great about this War of Mine and Papers, Please is the fact that they are using games as a tool of empathy. And I think that's something that's very important because we need to practice empathy. It's not something that you inherently have, and it's a skill. It's kind of like you can walk, but are you a good runner? You need to practice running to be able to do it. So you have the baseline ability there. I think you can understand what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to be inclusive, but essentially, most of us can walk, but it doesn't mean that most of us can run.
Right. I should also mention there is one storyline in Papers, Please where you are a good, loyal subject of Arstotzka.
Oh, really? Oh.
You don't have... Because you can be against the Order of the Izek Star.
Right.
Interesting thing. One last thing to tie this off, actually. One last little tidbit that I saw in the fan theories for Papers, Please is the symbol for the Order of the Izek Star
Yeah.
bears a striking resemblance to the symbol for Kolechia.
Oh, so as if it's an undercover uprising, undercover takeover of the land, as if it's a continuation of the previous upset.
We should end it there. We have a buddy who has to go to sleep. Let's not get into all that.
We're not gonna dwell on that. But yeah, I mean, I hope everybody appreciated this episode because I think it's great to remind ourselves that there's fun games that we love reliving, like Mario and Zelda and Sky. Even the heavier stuff, Skies of Arcadia. They're fun, and then you have games like this who are really exploring ideas that are worth having conversation on, and they're just adding to the conversation. They're not just
right.
Yeah.
And just for fun, I can tell you what the next 2 episodes are going to be.
Oh, I get to know ahead of time?
In this case, I'll let you.
Yay!
We're going to cover a Final Fantasy game.
Ooh.
And then it's going to be May.
It's gonna be May.
We got to do Mass Effect.
Yes. Yes. Guys, I'm so excited. Mass Effect. Okay, so we're going to do Final Fantasy first, so that'll be the next episode, and then the episode after that will be Mass Effect.
Yeah.
Get hyped, everybody. Get hyped, everybody. What?
Obviously, we're not going to cover all of Final Fantasy. I got to figure out which one we're going to do still. Anyway, that's going to be it for this episode.
Yay. Well, I want to thank everybody for listening, especially if you listened all the way through this episode. It's going to be...
It's like fun when we have a warning at the beginning.
Right. We appreciate you, exploring these serious topics with us, hopefully, and we hope we did it some justice and grace.
Yeah.
But thanks so much for listening, and we look forward to having you around next time. Bye.
Bye.